put burnout on the back burner.
Here to give hustle culture the heave-ho, it's behavioural psychologist Pádraig Walsh.
Looking fresh and far from burnt out, we should say.
Hustle culture, wow.
Yeah. Well, it's really interesting because, I mean, certainly my group, WhatsApp, everyone was talking about Jacinda Ardern. This very brave decision of hers to step down. She has said she no longer feels she has enough in the tank to keep going. I'm so glad because I feel like finally people are admitting that you can't be superwoman. You can't do that horrible phrase of juggle it all, that you just sometimes have to go, you know what, this is me done. This is my tipping point. But where did this whole idea of burnout come from? It's not just a made-up term that the media kind of bounce around.
No. It was a really brave decision by Jacinda Ardern to do that, because burnout is a sustained state of physical or emotional exhaustion. You can imagine that job of being head of state is going to lead to that type of state regularly. And she called it and said, you know, this is hitting burnout phases. Now, there are times where we can rely on grit, where we can rely on resilience to get through difficult periods. So burnout and stress are two separate things. Stress is a short period of that, but burnout occurs when there's a sustained period of this emotional element and physical exhaustion to the point where our fight or flight response is really, really difficult to turn off, and eventually it leads to us crashing.
Yeah, and I mean, you literally have physical symptoms of it, don't you?
Yeah, so burnout is something, I suppose it was first noted in the 1970s as a state where it can impact on both our work and our life and outside of that as well. And it has knock-on physical impacts upon us. So the WHO have identified this stress will have a knock-on impact onto our physical health, but also our lifespan. So there are real concerns here that it's not just regarding our mental health, our mental well-being, our relationships with others, our performance at work, but also the length of time we have on this earth.
Yeah, and sometimes it can be too late by the time you realise you're experiencing burnout. So is there any red flags that you could pick up on?
That's a really, really common thing, that people hit that phase of burnout and then they stop and they take that time out and they make that brave decision that Jacinda Ardern said and said, OK, I need to take time out here. And this was very common during the pandemic, where people felt like, you know, things stopped for a while and they realised how tired they were. And burnout is consistently, you'll hear anecdotally that people will say, wow, I didn't realise how burnt out I was or how exhausted I was until all of those stressors were removed from me. And it has a knock-on positive impact on their health. So, yeah, it really does have that kind of knock-on impact to somebody. But COVID was that period where after the event, people started to reevaluate. So in 2021, more people resigned from their jobs than had done before, and they cited burnout as the predominant cause. That they had, they were burnt out within their jobs, be it related to the pandemic or the realisation that actually, do you know what, it was too stressful. And there was that great reevaluation after COVID and after the pandemic and after the lockdowns that people said, do you know what, work-life balance needs to I need to reevaluate here, and I need to make sure that that burnout isn't affecting my work life or work life isn't affecting my home life. And that's something that's really important to us, is creating that rational detachment, particularly where we're in a very stressful job and we're coming home. We don't want the stress of that workplace coming home, or in some places, Karen, our stresses of home coming out into work, you know?
Why are you looking at me?
Yeah, you're always 3 kids. And so we're always trying to find ways that we can manage that and keep ourselves sane. Because remember, burnout is that sustained period of that fight or flight response kicking off all the time. So we need to have coping mechanisms, and really healthy ones for ourselves, so that we're not leading into that burnout.
So some more frequent reevaluation is what's needed. But I can't help but think, Frances, the singing and the Shannon, surely you've experienced burnout, have you?
I have, yeah. Well, sometimes I do feel exhausted, and then obviously I'm still the founder of the Rise Foundation, and I'm kind of the unpaid CEO, so I'm kind of still running the organisation. So it can be a bit tiring, particularly, I want to spend more time with my grandchildren, so I try and, squeeze in as much time with them as the weekends when I can. So it can be exhausting. And I suppose, and I know my colleague in Leinster House, Lynn Rowan, has done a piece of work around this actually recently, and she talks about, having to put boundaries in place and having to say no more and all of those things. But it's hard when you're in Leinster House because there's so many brilliant causes that really want to kind of pull you. I mean, you heard, there Rory talking about the housing situation and how difficult it is. And I'm also on the Housing Coalition, the Raise the Roof. And so there's so many different brilliant causes out there. I'm also the chair of the Mental Health Committee. I'm on the Health Committee. I'm on the Good Friday Committee. There's an awful lot going on. So it's just about when you come home, I suppose, for me, I chill out and I just, at 9 o'clock at night, I just completely switch off. I have to. It's the only way to do it.
Is that it, Pádraig, just setting boundaries? That's if 9 o'clock no one can get me kind of thing.
No, and that has become more difficult as people are blending their work and home life. So lots of folks are working from home. There's also added pressures in the workplace as well. Creating that divide can be tricky, particularly where there are now emails to respond to, there are home offices where the blurred lines are there. Most people are opting for that hybrid option when they are working, where they can, where they're trying to work a little bit from home, but not too much, and work a little bit in the office, but not too much as well. So there's that nice blend there that folks have found. But going back to maybe Rory's talk as well around that, if we're talking about home being this sanctuary, where if work is stressful, that we have this opportunity to wind down, it's much different if you're living in a space where you don't have that opportunity to wind down, and that there might be stresses at work, but if there are added financial pressures or stressors in the environment at home where you don't have enough space, you don't have enough freedom, then that can add and contribute to this feeling of burnout as well.
Because as much as people might dread their morning commute and the return home, there's actually sort of a Goldilocks rule in terms of commuting as well.
I like to think about it as a Goldilocks rule. Yeah, if your commute can be one of those places where you can try and create some detachment, where there's a space where I can divide out my work life and my home life. If you are commuting, I always like to think about it in terms of 20 minutes to half an hour is a nice, not too short, where you don't have an opportunity to wind down, but not too long where it becomes a stressful, stuck in traffic scenario. 20 minutes to half an hour seems to be that amount of time where if you use that period wisely, where you are doing something that takes pressure off you, that is personal to you, that helps you to wind down before you enter into the other environment.
What I think is really interesting about burnout, and it's there's more conversations around it at the moment in terms of mothers and this kin-keeping idea and this invisible workload that mothers are doing, and it's the play dates, it's the having the kick clean for soccer and knowing the routine for the kids. Is it typically maybe mums, and I don't want to be too general in saying that because obviously both parents weigh in, but do you find that because it's Jacinda who stepped down, it's kind of, a lot of women are kind of going, oh, thank God, she can't do it all. It's kind of given us license to say, it is bloody really hard.
Yeah, there was a lot of commentary around that, wasn't there? The fact that she was a mum, that she was a woman, that she had decided to step down. And she also said that her leadership was empathetic, that she was going to be empathetic towards folks who were suffering during COVID or after significant events in New Zealand. Now, one of the things is making sure that we're good at setting boundaries to avoid burnout as well. And that can be really, really tricky when there are all of these competing pressures there for mums, for family, for work. And yeah, it is tricky to create that kind of boundary there. I'm sure you're really good at it, Karen. I can tell.
Oh, thanks, my wonderful husband at home. Love you, John. Listen, you just try and make it work, whatever you have going on at home. You are going to stay with us because it's a special evening tonight. We've got Sham in the kitchen, so do stick with us, Pádraig.
Yeah,
thanks for
so
that.
much, Pádraig. Appreciate it. Now, up next, we're celebrating Lunar New Year with Lion's Head meatballs.
Whatever they are, we shall find out. We'll be back in the